everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today for what I am fairly certain is going to be an interesting discussion between Stav Appel and Ariana Reines about the Torah in the Tarot. The Torah in the Tarot is a beautiful tarot deck and booklet revealing the lost and forgotten Jewish origins of the tarot. For hundreds of years, the original meaning of the Tarot de Marseille, the artistic ancestor of the contemporary tarot, has been a source of mystery, speculation, and debate. In the Torah and the Tarot, Stav Appel, carefully analyzes the Noblet Tarot, uncovering a rich array of Jewish symbols ingeniously concealed in its images. Given the deck's origin during the Catholic Church's campaign to abolish Judaism, Appel argues persuasively that its secret content suggests it originally served as a tool for clandestine Jewish education, an encrypted curriculum. Writing in a rich style that draws on rabbinic literary forms, Appel has presented a landmark contribution to the field of tarot studies, revealing that when we perceive the tarot through a Jewish lens, we can, at long last, recognize the Torah hidden within the tarot. Stav Appel is a data scientist and a lifelong student of Torah. Earlier in his career, he was the director of the Israeli-Palestinian coexistence organization Nitzanei Shalom and the director of international service programs for American Jewish World Service. He holds an MBA from Yale School of Management and has studied Biblical Hebrew at Hebrew University and Yale Divinity School. After a chance encounter with an old deck of tarot cards, Stav began to explore the origins and meaning of the biblical references he recognized in its images. He is now a frequent speaker and popular writer on the Torah and the Tarot, the lost and forgotten Judaic origins of the mysterious Tarot de Marseille. He currently resides in North Salem, New York. You can find him at Torah.tarot on Instagram, where he's really online. Ariana Reines is the author of, wait for it, The Rose, Wave of Blood, A Sandbook, Mercury, the Obie-winning play Telephone, Coeur de Lion, and The Cow. She has created performances for Stuart Shave Modern Art, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, Performance Space New York, and many others. In 2020, while at Divinity School at Harvard, she founded Invisible College, a hub for the study of sacred texts and poetry online. And she lives in New York, New York. I'm the editorial director and co-founder of Ayin Press. We are extremely proud to have been the publisher of this beautiful project, which was part history, part artwork, part esoteric exegesis, and a whole lot more. And it's been a beautiful process and a wild ride to interact with the Stav Appel to bring this project into the world. And we're extremely excited today to be in the midst of Ariana and Stav as they enlighten each other, themselves, maybe us, about their experience with the tarot and in researching its murky origins and how it impacts and illuminates their life and learning on this planet. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stav Appel.
Hi, Eden. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to all of you who have joined the call today to listen to us. And I feel a great obligation to just thank the long list of people who made the whole Torah and the Tarot project possible. Unfortunately, if I really named down and called out everyone who contributed, that would probably fill up the entire program. So I just want to just express it. Let me just first start by thanking Eden and Ayin Press and the Ayin crew and Ariana in particular. But let me just acknowledge there's a very large cast of characters who really contributed. This is not at all a project by one lone individual. And it's been an amazing few months since the publication of the Torah and the Tarot. I've been going around. I've given probably scores of talks at different synagogues and community centers. It's been really an amazing experience. And in my talks, I spend a lot of time focusing on what people want to see. They want to see what's concealed in the Noble Tower de Marseille, all the secret Judaic and the cards. It's very interesting. Unfortunately, we spend so much time focusing on what's concealed in the cards. I get to spend very little time on talking about why this is important at all, why we should care. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this question because this project has occupied so much of my time and energy over the past 10 years. I'm often thinking, why am I taking this so seriously? Why have I invested so heavily into it? And so today, I just want to speak for a few minutes about why I believe this project matters and why it should be of interest to people. But before I give this kind of like, it'll be very short, but let me just acknowledge that I greatly prefer a conversation over a lecture. I take a conversation any day over a lecture. So you guys should feel free to insert questions and comments in the chat. Eden, after my comments, we're going to have a dialogue. So feel free to put comments and questions to kind of add fuel to the conversation. I'm hoping for this to be far more dynamic than just me prattling on. So why is this story important? Why should anybody care about it all at all? Maybe this is just a bizarre theory or wrinkle in history. There's four key reasons that arise in my mind, and I'm going to list them out in ascending order of importance. The first is that the Jean Noblet Tower de Marseille is an amazing work of genius. And it deserves to be widely studied and known far beyond me and the handful of people who bought the Torah and the Torah. It is an incredibly impressive array of content that has been concealed through a truly genius level of methodology. To my eyes, there's no way an artist made it in a weekend, but rather it was perfected over years, if not decades, by a community of artists. Today, the one and only copy of the Jean Noblet Tower de Marseille sits in the French National Archives, where it is categorized as a deck of playing cards. That's a real shame and a tragedy because it's actually a masterpiece of the Renaissance. And for me, I will feel this project has reached its conclusion when that is widely recognized. That is reason one. Um, Reason two is that it opens the door to an incredibly beautiful tribal story of resilience. Um, what the Jewish community experienced in the 1500s has been largely forgotten, but the Noble Torah opens up that door, that a window into the history when the church, the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Office of the Inquisition had targeted Judaism for destruction. And the Noble Torah can be understood as an artifact of that time, of that struggle to persevere. And that is it's a very tragic time. It's also a very beautiful time and an era of amazing theological and religious and spiritual productivity. That is the second reason. The next two reasons are a bit more elusive. They took me a far longer to really understand why they're important and why they're beautiful. I mean, the first two reasons are somewhat readily obvious when you read the Torah and the Torah. The third reason is it's an amazing case study in the fragility of history and the fragility of historical memory. The Noble Torah will completely transform and morph whether or not you interpret it through a Jewish lens of interpretation. The cards will completely change whether you're looking at it with your left eye or your right eye. And I believe that the ability for the cards to transform so dramatically offers us a lot of wisdom that is relevant to many other challenges of historical interpretation. I think just that ability for transformation alone offers very deep wells of wisdom about the follies of historical interpretation. And the fourth reason took me a long time to realize, to appreciate. And this is probably the most difficult to explain. And let's start about 175 years ago. Eliphas Levi, who was a French Catholic, his real name was Louis Constant. He wrote under a Hebrew pen name, Eliphas Levi. He invented the occult Torah. And the occult tarot was basically a marriage between kind of syncretic Kabbalah and this deck of playing cards. He wrote this book, Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic, in which he presented that each card of the Tarot de Marseille was a secret vessel for a Kabbalistic Hebrew letter. And this really gave birth to the entire contemporary Tarot world as eventually it led to the evolution of what we now know as the occult Tarot. And 100 years later, more than 100 years later, after Eliphas Levi, a tarot historian by the name of Michael Dummett wrote a very serious book called The Game of Tarot from Ferrero to Salt Lake City, in which he said that Eliphas Levi more or less was a charlatan and a fraud. At best, he was a deluded fool, but at worst, he was an intentional charlatan. Dummett said basically more or less that the entire occult Tarot was a big fat lie. Um, in this debate between Eliphas Levi and Michael Dummett, it looks incredibly different when placed in the light of the Torah and the Tarot. Basically, in short, the Torah and the Torah demonstrates, I believe it proves, that Dummett was entirely wrong. And this is very important because you realize that in the 1500s, the Holy Office and the Inquisition and the Catholic Church had targeted Judaism for destruction, but not only the Jews. It had targeted a wide range of characters who all had the audacity to rebel against the spiritual totalitarianism of the church. And that included scientists, free thinkers, speculative theologians, people of questionable moral character, and yes, Jews. And in many ways, Jews were the most recognizable dissenters from the authority of the Catholic Church. And this way, they became kind of the symbol, they became a wedge issue that symbolized the values of pluralism and tolerance. And suddenly, in this light, the syncretic ideals of the occult tarot suddenly looks very different. The occult tarot emerges no longer just as Eliphas Levi's fabrication or fraud, but rather it emerges as the artistic and spiritual child of all those who dwelled in the dungeons of the Inquisition. And it's a symbol of those who oppose the church. And in broader terms, we can understand it as the struggle, a symbol of the struggle of the esoteric to overcome the tyranny of the exoteric. And the exoteric traditions, they want very clear walls, very high barriers between the faiths. Whereas the esoteric was always very happy to learn from each other. And the exoteric always says, I am God's representative on earth, and you are a heretic. The exoteric says, I possess the truth, and you are a liar. The exoteric says, I'm going to go to heaven, whereas you are going to suffer damnation. And the esoteric, in very sharp contrast, could never conceive of a God so small and so tiny. So really I offer that the most important kind of takeaway from the findings of the Torah and the Tarot is that the occult Tarot, or what I'll now call the secret Tarot, is actually far more important and precious and genuine than we ever imagined. It far surpasses the accusations of Dummett. And so I think for all those of us who want to take the Tarot seriously, the Tarot now emerges as something far more serious and genuine and potent than was ever suspected before. So thanks. Thank you for letting me rant a bit. So Ariana, I'll turn to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Stav. Thank you, Eden. It's really an honor to be in this space. I'm Ariana, and I had also the honor of writing an introduction to this extraordinary deck. And I thought I would talk with you all a little bit about my experience of Stav's work, but also of the tarot as a practitioner. So I suppose I should say that I sort of have an ethics of practice. I think for me, if you write poetry, I consider you a poet. And there is something about that very simple ethics that provides also a very intriguing way into the path of discovery or the pedagogy that the tarot represents. I didn't find it like a mental leap at all to think about the tarot as a way of educating Jews into the basics of the Torah at a time when that act was punishable by death, because the entire framework of the tarot for me really is an educational tool. I see the tarot not so much as a divinatory or a fortune-telling device, although you can absolutely explore that and experience that through your relationship with the tarot. I understand it as a relational pedagogy, really. And I thought I would just tell you a tiny bit about how I came into it and how I discovered Stav's work and what I felt his work was teaching me. And this, this is only a few years studying with your work, Stav. So I feel like in 10 years we'll know more about what it's teaching us. I was kind of initiated into esoterica, I suppose, by finding embarrassingly occult objects in the street. I had like 10 years of just finding stuff. And whenever I would find the first thing I found happened to be a tarot deck. But whenever I would find it, I felt deeply made fun of, mocked. Um, so the first thing was actually on my college campus. When I was an undergrad at Barnard, I found a tarot deck in a very, very goth looking velvet bag with a crystal in it. And, being a Jew from Salem, Massachusetts, I felt like I was being mocked. But the problem is, by whom? Like, who was mocking me? you know? And so it went on for years. I found a witch's broom in Paris. And then the ultimate accident, I was in a car accident in Haiti after my first day on a team that was doing relief work after the earthquake in 2010. And it's too long a story to relate here, but I met there a teacher, and it was he who taught me the tarot. And I was being initiated, I suppose, through the only way that I would accept initiation, which is to say through accidents, through synchronicities, through things that I can't possibly have taken responsibility for, and yet the way that I knew that I was in a spiritual experience was by being embarrassed. That was the only way that I could be sure that something was really happening, was the sense that somebody is laughing at me. I don't know why, that must be my thing. Hopefully you aren't being mocked with every spiritual revelation in your life, but maybe you are. We all need something to let us sort of open the door into maybe a more expanded state of experience and a willingness to let go of resistance, I suppose. And it's laughing at myself that seems to be the thing that works for me. So, there's something very interesting and intriguing and dangerous about syncretism, as Stav was saying. It's amazing to me the medieval style debates that are still raging around any notion of, should we say, cultural mixing or borrowing or influence, the anxiety of influence. It fascinates me that we still seem to have a lot of problems with this, at least socially. But somehow in the inner world, in the internal world, paradoxes can come to life and coexist and become fruitful and multiply. And and it was actually for me a really, really amazing experience to discover that something that appears to be a game could actually be very, very serious. And I've noticed that the more grim things become culturally, politically, socially, spiritually on the planet, there's also this way in which, on some level, also our reality seems more cruelly hilarious, perhaps. Um, and there's a way in which also the old mouthpieces of wisdom don't seem to be emitting the wisdom that we have relied upon them for so long. And I think that there's a funniness about our real experience that makes me think very much of the story of the fool. The way that I was taught the tarot by my teacher in Haiti was that one way to begin with it was to think about it as the story, the life story of the fool. That this man begins, he's taking a step in the Torah, in the tarot, he's got his pants down fully. And but you've all probably seen different versions of this that are like a little bit more G rated. But this fool is embarking on a journey through which he will experience all that there is to experience of life, and through which he will, we hope, attain wisdom, attain illumination in some way. And there's a way in which that journey, the fool's journey, it seems like it's also giving us a signal about how to seek wisdom at a time when that quest is not even really particularly socially favored. At a time when that quest is perhaps a lonely one or a heretical one for various reasons and in various contexts. So I I think the main thing that I wanted to kind of bring into this space, because I could like spout off about religious experiences and weird synchronicities for days. I think what I want to present is like I don't know, a hobby horse or like a pet theory that I've been nursing that I can't prove and I haven't researched empirically, but it's just a hunch that I have, which is that at times of great stupidity on the planet Earth, wisdom hides in games. This is my hypothesis. This is what I present to you humbly today, and I'd be happy to discuss it, play with it, subject it to all manner of critique and criticism. But that's my hunch. And with that, maybe Eden, you want to take it away and start mastering the ceremony.
Sure. I love that. I love that working proposition. Stav, what do you make of that, or with that idea that in times of
Well,
crisis and chaos, wisdom hides in games?
one thing that really struck me is this idea of spiritual moments kind of being wrapped in mockery or embarrassment. We There is a pervasive cynicism in our world today. So often when we experience something genuine, we simultaneously we have to endure a moment of embarrassment for it. Um, and I don't think it's a coincidence, and or you alluded to this, that the sources of wisdom that we were taught to rely upon have proven entirely disappointing. You know, the and I call these I'm calling these the exoteric walls that we reside within, the little spiritual cubby holes we're supposed to inhabit. Um, to my eye, they're not serving their purpose. They're more destructive than constructive. So yeah, it sounds so. It seems like the time of finding wisdom in games is upon us, which that may be a great echo of the period of the Renaissance, which was a time of great beauty and great creativity, but also incredible tyranny at the same time.
What does the game do for wisdom?
It forces it to move, you know. It forces it to play. It subjects wisdom to chance, which is what it means to live, right? It forces wisdom to become a fool, which is also a wonderful experiment. Forces it into a state of innocence and discovery, makes it act like a living person. which is very, very fascinating. It makes it behave differently than a holy book, I think.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and and let me build upon that because there is a thread of tension in the Jewish tradition that many people don't acknowledge or remember is that there's tension between students of the Talmud. The Talmud is it's a big legal book. It has legend and lore, but it's primarily a book of laws. Um, and the Talmud is in contrast to the Zohar, which is a big book of spiritual and mystical poetry. And the medium of the Zohar is poetry. It is not laws. And and poetry is play in its creativity, and by definition, it can be interpreted and reinterpreted in playful ways. In many ways, the Zohar is uh, very sages playing with the Torah and playing with the Talmud. Um, so it's interesting to think of games in tension. Religious law is very serious and very somber. It's very right and wrong, whereas game by nature invites heresy and infraction and infringement.
Something occurs to me about the Renaissance that I hadn't thought of until our conversation just now, which is that it makes sense to me that the figures, the great artists and thinkers that we know, whose names we know, it makes sense to me that they would have returned to Greek and Roman culture, and also that they would have retreated into their own individuality at a time of great of war and repression and kind of consolidations of power. It's very interesting to me that so it's a kind of internal refuge to invent because it's not just that they were taking inspiration from antiquity as history, but they were also inventing antiquity for their own creative purposes and making it new through their own bodies, through their own imaginations. And it was a very embodied imagination that they were busy with, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Brunelleschi, everything that was being done was deeply physically researched. And I think likewise, every kind of spiritual discovery was one that was won through the body, if you will, and or invented through the body. And I think that there's a lot, like, as something of an esotericist, I can relate to that. I can relate to taking refuge in my imagined, made up past. And I don't mean to call into question your research, Stav. I
Oh
don't
yeah.
mean to say that there's no such thing as real history. But artistically speaking, or when it comes to drawing energy, trying to tap a source for some real energy to live on and create through in dangerous times, I can identify with that, like I've never sort of felt this identification with those Renaissance guys kind of until this moment. So thank you for that.
So there's a lot there. This and that's very important to me is that the traditional the religious faiths, supposedly they possess truth. And truth by definition is not supposed to move. It's not supposed to evolve. How could you believe one thing 100 years ago and something today? That proves that maybe you were wrong 100 years ago. So the exoteric always tries to pretend that they've always possessed, objective truth, but meanwhile it's always It's truth is no matter what is moving. And no matter what, whenever and I'm fascinated by that about how like in the Zohar, it's fascinating. It's a creative reinterpretation of the Torah. It's representing the stories with a completely new face. So the line between theological truth and creative reinvention or creative misinterpretation or unintentional fabrication, it's incredibly blurry. And for me, that's actually the heart of the esoteric is the exoteric never wants to admit that things are changing because it admits that maybe I'm making a mistake, maybe something's wrong. Whereas the esoteric, they can see this like really sloppy, wild, ongoing evolution of our understanding of the divine. But instead of responding with cynicism, you can still see that process as holy and precious and divine.
I have a question. about maybe the 19th century way in which Judaica became a kind of exotic um, pose, or even like a kitsch even. I'm really, really interested in the ways in which, like, maybe loathing, cultural fear, taboo is recuperated as a kind of exotica, or turned into something somehow alluring, mysterious, occult, dark. I don't know. I would love to hear what you think about that, also very unstable and muddled and somewhat volatile dynamic.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, and so the Jews in the Renaissance, for better or for worse, were cast in the Catholic imagination as the magic people, the people of magic. And there's a really simple explanation for that. Is if you read the Bible, there's a lot of Jews, pulling off a lot of magic tricks, and so people associated Judaism with all these kind of Old Testament miracles. And when Pico Mirandola, when he introduced Christian Kabbalah, it was definitely, its power was that it was the source of Jewish magic. Um, and so it, and so that there's kind of a good, I mean, on one half that's like flattering that they see the Jews as possessing this, like, this magic, and you can, Gandalf and Obi-Wan Kenobi are in some ways kind of in the image of the old wandering Jew with the staff. They're all echoes of Moses. Um, and so on the one hand, that's like really, I mean, it's kind of flattering and it's interesting. On the other hand, it's extremely dangerous. And probably the best example of that danger is Eliphas Levi, in his book Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic, he made all these illustrations with the Star of David and Solomon the magician. Those same illustrations were used in copies of the Elders of the Prodigals of Zion. So the Jewish magician can be fetishized, but very easily it can become the villain. And even today, I mean, I just heard Tucker Carlson just the other day make a claim that he believes that the contemporary American support for Israel is in some ways attributed to Jewish magic. I mean, that's the extent to which that idea of the Jewish magician is still alive and well in kind of the undercurrents of the contemporary world.
Thank you.
I have a question for both of you, and I think it can go in a number of different directions. But thinking about wisdom being transmitted through games, um, the kind of productive, let's say, call them kind of like hoops that a game makes wisdom and both the player of the game kind of jump through to get to access it. Um, I'm curious if each of you can speak more to both the aesthetics, the mechanics, um, maybe even the craft of code and encryption, uh, both in the tarot. I'm thinking also in the hermeneutical approach to Torah, which Stav you brought up earlier, which is the only way that somebody could read the same book for 3,500 years is to continually reinterpret it and recreate it in perpetuity. So this kind of like it feels to me that the approach to a body of wisdom or subject matter with that kind of encrypted orientation is in some ways an act of generosity that a reader brings to a text or a player brings to a game, let's say. Um, so as artists, as researchers, as practitioners, as um, debunkers, table turners, whatever, gamers, players, um, what, yeah, what do you have to say about the function, the mechanics, the aesthetics of code and encryption within art, within the esoteric, both creating and kind of interfacing with? as audience or receiver?
Stav, you have to start
But
because
I
you,
have to start.
yes.
So it's a beautiful question, and I'm a lifelong, very passionate student of Torah, and I will say that the beauty of Torah is rooted for me in that it is written in code, and by that I mean it is sparse enough. It has so many blanks in the narrative that every story can be continually invented and reinvented. And if it wasn't written in that manner, it probably would have been long forgotten. Um, Now, I guess the point of code is to transmit wisdom from one person to another in a ways that it's not detectable by a third party. Um, so the Torah it's a problem because no people debate what is the true meaning of the Torah. The whole value is that no one can really speak. No, people I know people all the time claim to speak on behalf of the Torah, but the truth is no one can. No one has the right to do that, which is why it's still precious and beautiful. Um, but in many ways, the tarot cards are actually whether intentionally or not, I don't know whether by accident, but it took that component, that mysterious, open, wondrous component of the Torah, it took that component and expanded it a thousandfold. Where every time you deal a deck of cards, it's a different story, it's a different narrative. You can deploy it for a completely different purpose. And it's so beautiful for me to think of the Tarot as a different incarnation of that same creative energy, a different it's a different avatar that went on to a new life for a new audience but somehow there's some symbolic echo occurring in other worlds beyond our comprehension in which there is a genuine connection or resonance between and perhaps our Torah is even just another echo of an echo of something that's even more primordial that also coexists in a world to come.
Well, the Torah, I mean, just building on that, the Torah is expresses itself through language, words, letters. And I think on one level, what I'm hearing you say, I'll just playfully, respond and build on it is like, oh, it sounded to me like you were saying on some level, if there's a deeper text, let's say, that the Torah is an echo of or an expression of through letters and words, that the tarot is possibly just another expression of that deeper kind of like text in images,
Exactly. Yes.
essentially.
It's a different
And so
incarnation. Exactly.
it,
And you know that this is that there's this concept of Torah Tmima, the perfect complete Torah that exists only in the world to come, that which our Torah is only but a shadow of, a reflection of. So
right.
there's kind of and it's a beautiful idea to think of a pantheon of literary texts that exist in different realms to which we're only privy to one view, to one reflection of.
And also just different mediums of the expression of that kind of deeper, the rabbis talk about the blueprint of creation. So that kind of like subtext, let's say. Um, Ariana, please.
I find myself thinking about like gematria and the shuffling base pairings of our DNA, which is a very ludic or apparently ludic process. And I'm not a Kabbalist myself, although my teacher who taught me the tarot is. Um, and I guess, I feel like these word and number games go way back on some level. And there's something, so we're obviously living in a time where there's widespread belief that what we're being shown is not the real reality. And there's widespread belief that there are secret codes being exchanged and things being concealed and things being faked, et cetera, et cetera. And I find this it's very fascinating to live in a time like this. My mother was paranoid schizophrenic. In some ways, she had a bit of a Hasidic madness. But it's as though the entire culture is now thinking like my mother, which for me, on a personal level, is very interesting. But I'll just say, I I have worked also as an astrologer for 20 years, and we've just entered a new Uranian era, and it's people are very open to wild ideas, and that's both extremely exciting and highly dangerous and volatile. In a similar way that this kind of this figure of the Jewish mage is both it could be cuddly if it's the sword and the stone. Maybe Merlin seems to be like the hermit figure in the tarot, or like the mosaic figure, but it's also very dangerous, and it can flip in a fraction of a second, as we all know. And I think I mean, personally, what interests me, I suppose I should say I've avoided the obsession with code and code breaking, because poetry is also seen as something of a cipher, and it's taught like a puzzle. It's taught like something that you are excluded from unless you can solve it, like a Rubik's Cube or something. And then if you've solved it, then you're in. But that's not my experience. That's not how I do poetry, or that's not my experience of it, which is not to say I'm hostile to the code side of things. I just sort of have this dread of over determining or holding too rigidly any hankering for a solution or anything that I might call a solution.
Yeah.
And for me, what I love about Torah is how dirty and wretched the human being is, and how magnificently the human being testifies to that. I love the way human nature is presented in this somewhat like simultaneously inscrutable and yet totally viscerally relatable, real way. And so, with this old document, because human beings are always trying to get away from what we really are, and we're like, I'll be a machine, I'll be any, like, please, like anything, like give me a new face, like I like take my brains out, take my guts out, do what any like anything to not be whatever this is, or to not manifest whatever this, original germ of being that is coming out, whatever that is. We're like, we'll take any ticket out that we can get. And what I love is these testimonies of this totally gnarled, bizarre, just freaky, irrepressible, undomesticatable, weird, dangerous, beautiful, like messy human spirit that is in that book. And the reading and rereading of that book is like, you could try as much as you want to get away from this, but it's the thisness that is through that you're going to know whatever this divine mystery is. And
And
you can't remove it, no matter what you do. You can't cut it out. You can't, they'll try to, I don't know, all the, whatever badness is thrown upon us as Jews, like, that's also only a relatively surface layer of the human problem. And that's really the game we're playing. Um, the things that are in the Torah are in people. They
let me
are in people, and they are still in people. And that's also why I think it's fascinating that as a mnemonic device, the game very wisely has preserved this understanding of what human life is all about. The game wouldn't have lasted if it didn't have this deep relevance to the human soul, and if people weren't able to again and again find themselves educated through a relationship with it.
Yeah, you said a couple beautiful points I want to respond to. Um, and and you really it's funny how plainly you stated one of the great secrets of the Torah is that it's incredibly unflattering to its main characters. People are often surprised by that. They're like, why am I supposed to honor these people? They make so many, petty, horrible errors. Um, For many years in the Jewish community, it was always seen as a as an incredible transgression to teach Torah to non-Jews. And the reason being is because it makes Jews and the heroes of the Bible look really unflattering. The whole point of the Bible is that it puts all these unsavory, horrible events front and center because it wants to be really clear and upfront about all the possible moral failings of even our greatest heroes. Um, so it's beautiful to hear you state that so outwardly. Um,
Um, yeah, it makes me some of what you were saying, Ariana, makes me think about the difference in posture to um, solving differentiated from playing. And if there's like an approach to a code that has a single static solution that you solve and then you've solved it and it's over, versus some sort of kind of like infinite code, or that is like iterable. The game is actually not to solve it. The game is like, if you solve it, you lose.
The
Game's
game
over.
is to play it.
Game over. It's meant to be like it's like when I play paddleball on the beach with my son, and it's like, how long can we keep this up? And I think there's something in both the orientation to engage material like that, but I think also from an artistic and esoteric standpoint, in a design, realm of like designing games that are not meant to be solved, and that the playing is the winning in some way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let me build on that because I think it's a really beautiful point, and that there's and that connection why Torah and Torah are both still around, and why they're still studied and treasured so deeply. Torah will never be solved. If it could be solved, if we knew what the right answer was, it would have dissolved into history a long time ago. And interestingly enough, that was one of the when people first started to write the Talmud, there was a lot of anxiety about it because there was always the written Torah and the oral Torah. And the oral Torah, by definition, was supposed to be oral. It was supposed to grow and evolve and morph. And people were terrified that, oh, if we write everything down, it'll induce paralysis into the tradition. Um, and someone could argue it maybe did to a certain extent. Now that and so in this so there's a strange kind of ironic outcome here. And then in this sense, I'm palpably aware that what I wrote, the Torah and the Torah, is in some ways an act of violence to the Tarot. And I didn't why? Because I go through the cards and I tell you the meaning of each card. And that way I'm not in some ways I'm giving you the right answer. Um, and I would offer I don't that was not my intention. And I don't know whether the occult tarot that we have today is an accident of history or if this was the intentional design all along. But the portrait I present, I very much hope people imbibe it as one interpretation that was relevant for one target audience at a very specific piece and portion of time. But I definitely believe that it's almost as if this work of art has a desire of its own, as if it's its own being. I am sure it wants to exist and wander, evolve far, far beyond what I described.
But there's a way in which our lives sometimes align, they shuffle the holy book. I mean, like we like we are in the garden, we're exiled from the garden, we're fighting with our brother, we're building a Tower of Babel. These things happen in the course of a human life. As a matter of fact. And what I think is sort of great about, I mean, I feel like it's important to say something about where language lives because language moves also, right? Obviously, so there's the oral Torah, as you said, or the way I think of it, there's the poetry that's closer to speech or song. And then there's the written realm and the written world, which is on some level, on the one hand, an aid to memory because we can externalize the archive. But in another way, it atrophies and somewhat attenuates the play of of the memory that's carried in the body. And one thing I think about when I think about what it means to be Jewish, for me, is to carry everything you know on your back, to carry everything you know in here, because you're away from the archive or you're away from home or you're, like I don't know. I don't know how other people feel in the room. This is in my body. Like that sense of wandering or exile or diaspora, it's in every breath I take. And so there's also an element of where is the privileged wisdom? Is it written down or is it being spoken? And I think that kind of speech writing anxiety that was very, very germane and fascinating to the deconstructionists. I feel like it was 40 years ago, people were talking about the speech writing divide. And Abraham being called twice by God. I think I think Avital Ronell cast it like that the Almighty had a stutter, that he had to say Abraham's name twice. Very interesting. You could spend your whole life with this stuff, and we do. And we do. But I think we're entering a time technologically where it may be that the word that is privileged is not the written one. It may be that the Torah that we're living now, that we're writing now, is perhaps the oral one for a while. That for whatever reason, that spirit of language, or that spirit of wisdom that comes through language, if it comes, seems to be coming in this other way right now. It's not to say that there's nothing wise that's written, but I guess it's a way of saying you couldn't possibly close down anyone's experience of the tarot by decoding it in the way that you have, because I think it only enriches it. It's a palimpsest, I think. No?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. There's something. It's very interesting. So the written word is so precise and accurate, particularly English. It's such a utilitarian language nowadays. And I confess, I find for spiritual matters, my mind always reverts to Hebrew because of the ambiguity. Hebrew, or I should say biblical Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew kind of concedes that there's a realm beyond which words can reach. And interestingly enough, the Torah, by virtue of not having words at all, or I guess very few words, kind of agrees to that spiritual language that exists in the realm that words has no on which words do not have domain.
And it gets close to the pictographic language of dreams. Like there's something about the sort of visual choreography and the iconographic clarity and brilliance. And also, it's very witty. They're very witty images.
Yes, they're very
And
funny. They're very funny.
very,
Very funny.
very.
That-
And but so it gets at something very primal where we can get back to where we're in a hieroglyphic realm, where the word is also an image, where
yeah,
the word is an image that's also a feeling. And things are able to come to life in this almost oniric, dreamlike way. And the other thing that I think is very fascinating pedagogically is that the wisdom or the education that you arrive at through this relationship, you feel like you feel like it was your idea, which is the best way to teach.
yes, I'm sure people have had the experience of someone doing a spread of tarot cards and it experiencing it like a dream induction machine where it conjures you images and you're compelled to grant an interpretation. And interestingly enough, Spinoza described the Torah as hieroglyphics, that he from his and he was saying from a critical perspective, but that the objective true meaning is long lost over 1,000 years. So in many ways, when you read a story of Torah, it is also an intentionally induced dream where you're left to interpret what is the meaning of these characters today in the framework of my life today. And for me, the magic of the Torah is its ability to tell completely different stories with the same words to different people depending on where they are in life.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, I feel compelled to just throw another game into the mix, which is that now that you've both kind of surfaced this game as vehicle for wisdom during times of crisis, the the Stav, your proposal of the tarot being an expression of such a purpose is interestingly not there is another, there may be many more, but for sure there's another similar time period ish, which is and interestingly there's history, and then there's kind of like like folk lore that has been added on. So I think it kind of like demonstrates, performs, illustrates a number of points that you've both brought up, and I think that your project brings up, which is the dreidel. Historically, and I think it brings one more element into the mix, which I'll say in a second. But so the folklore, which I think there was the first written instantiation of this story is, I think, only in the early 1900s, but in the way that memory, myth, folklore works, it gets projected and then that becomes the reality and whatever. Is that kids would during the Maccabee Greek wars that gave rise to Hanukkah, uh, children would play dreidel in the caves because it was illegal to learn Torah during that time. And so similarly, the dreidel with the 4 Hebrew letters on it would be used as a mnemonic device, and the children would use it as kind of like a study pedagogic learning device. But then when the Greek soldiers would come by, they'd be like, haha, we're just playing a game. Okay, so that's the kind of folklore. Now, historically, there's scholarship, and it says, oh, it's actually based on a German children's game from like the 1500s or something like this, and that it was then adapted, kind of absorbed into Jewish religious game um, game practice, um, and so I think so you have all these elements of uh, game as technique to be a transmitter of wisdom in secret in times of crisis, which, Ariana, that was your contention. The dreidel story kind of like shows that. It has the folkloric element of the looking back and recreating a history, and it has the historical, really where to come from, what is it? I think one other thing that's interesting, that I think also corresponds to some of this diasporic wandering experience of the Jewish people throughout history is um, taking forms from from other cultures and then imbuing them, absorbing and imbuing them. So the tarot as this Italian triumphi deck of cards being used for da 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 da. Okay, one thing that I became aware of in working with Stav editorially on the book was like, oh, something happened when the Triomphe moved from Italy to the Tarot de Marseille of France. Something happened, and then Stav goes on to propose some more and more things happened. But then you have also this dreidel, which is like, oh, this was like a German children's playing game. Jews of that area, kind of like also who were also living in the same area, they were exposed to this game and they absorb this game and then kind of imbue it with this like coded game transmissitional significance. that we're still playing. And then we forget the meaning of the game. And then we relearn the meaning of the game, but it's a new meaning than it was maybe the last time the people relearned the meaning of the game. But that would be a third thing that I would throw in the mix is this to get us back to that kind of absorptive hybridity, hyphenated syncretist game as well in the mix. But there, any does that bring up anything? Any resonances, jokes?
I mean, I'm I to me it's the difference between kind of historical and deep time, if you will, or between um anthropology and art or something.
Mm,
And there's something very interesting about, like, on some level, if I was sort of taught the tarot, I was taught with the Tarot de Marseille. It was the deck that I was able to buy at the time in post-earthquake Haiti. If I was taught the tarot by a voodoo priest and a Gnostic bishop in Port-au-Prince in 2010 with the Tarot de Marseille, somehow I was already imbuing it Jewishly or with Jewishness just by being me, right? But Stav's work is still a complete paradigm shift because not only did I not realize how Jewish I was being that whole time, in a way, that I was exploring the tarot in this syncretic, certainly hospitable to a Jew kind of a way, but not in an exoterically or a definitively doctrinally correct Jewish way. It's it's fascinating, and that insofar as it has the quality of a recovered memory, which also I would say is what spiritual or religious experience is like. I find that it has a quality of remembering to it. I find that the things that I discover, the things that I learn, the things that are these big revelations, they have a quality, an uncanny quality of remembering. And what Stav's research has done is literally a recovering of memory, of a like an a reintroduction of something that had been formerly familiar as one thing, but now we see, now it comes into view with a great clarity, as something not marginal or off to the side at all, but fully centrally in the stream of our tradition. And that's very interesting. It's like a funny, it's one of those funny moments when kind of deep time and historical time align and they come into the same space, and there's a kind of exhale of relief, and it's like nice to see you, you know? If that made any sense at all, I don't know.
Totally. And and about the comparison of tarot to dreidel, it's very interesting. Actually, Mary Manzavine, this popular vlogger, she called the tarot a dreidel on crack. That was her joke. I thought that was a funny joke. Um, but it is interesting to, so let me point out, like, it's interesting, we love the dreidel story, and people don't like it when they point out that it didn't exist in Roman times. It came much later because we're so hungry for our tradition to be pure. People, we're so hungry for purity that we want to have a portion of, we want something to be true and authentic and genuine. So whenever we find out that it's somehow been infected by something alien, it upsets us a little bit. And the Tarot is a little bit like that. Like, people, Italian Tarot historians, they don't like the idea that maybe there was a Jewish contribution to the evolution of the Tarot, because that doesn't it's not possible, because it's Italian, it's not Jewish, it's different. And the great truth that people have a hard time absorbing, and this is kind of the truism of syncretism, that, and people use that term as an insult. There's nothing pure on the planet. There's nothing. We are all part of a conversation, physically and theologically and spiritually. There's an ongoing evolution where all these different streams and traditions are constantly in communication with each other. We're always constantly borrowing and copying, either intentionally or by accident. Um, and that's the great, that's the great spiritual truth that I think a lot of people, uh, for whatever reasons, have a hard time admitting.
Yeah. Um, before we go over and hear some questions that have been sent over from people signed in, and Stav, I address this question to you. Ariana, I address it to you as well. Um, where is your research taking you now? And what else have you continued learning and looking into after the release of Torah and the tarot? And Ariana, just in general, I think the first part of the question, what are you tripping on now, kind of in the penumbra of the of this esoteric and discussion? But stop first. Where have you gone afterwards?
Right, right. So the Torah and the Torah is really focused on um, elucidating what emerges from the Noble Torah when you're given permission to interpret it through a Jewish lens of interpretation, and it really goes through card by card. And in some ways, it was a very long, challenging task. But actually, in many ways, that was the easy part of the story. There's a much harder part of the story, which is, well, what does that reveal about the history of the Tarot? And what does it reveal about the history of the occult Tarot? And that's much more challenging because that history is kind of hidden away, and a lot of it is unknown. A lot of it is not trusted. Um, it's fascinating, how many people just look at the occult tarot figures and see them as charlatans and frauds, but it turns out the tarot historians also suffered tremendously from massive historical blind spots. So trying to piece together a historical narrative that makes sense of all this is a really fascinating challenge. I don't know if I'm gonna solve it. I don't know, but that's what I'm wrestling and reading about. We're trying to put together a coherent narrative that reconciles all these open questions and mysteries.
So I published two books around the same time that this deck was brought into the world, and both of them they're a little bit my Cain and Abel. They're kind of my fraternal twins. I was writing them at the same time. One of them was trying to kill the other one the whole time. I'm very grateful not to be writing them anymore, although I've been touring for both. I just got back from England and I'm going to Australia in a few days in support of both of these books. So, in a lot of ways, I'm still learning what those books are. But they both of the books have an esoteric and an exoteric meaning for me. And I feel like something that has been emerging for me through this writing and also the touring is a lot of people have written me letters, almost like coming out letters. Either they're it turns out that they're Jewish, but they're not, that's not the identity they're leading with in their public life, for example. And I guess I've been hearing from a lot of Jewish people, including lots of people I didn't know were Jewish. And I'm hearing from them in private that they're finding something Jewish in my work, I suppose, in a way that I am happy about but didn't consciously intend. And it's making me feel like there's an emergent, quiet, kind of Judaic experience that has been it's not just been socially hidden or intentionally occulted the way that Torah had to hide on some level in the tarot at a certain time. But I'm seeing and experiencing a kind of a different kind of a private world. And one of the ways that I've described this, and this is another one of those like shoot from the hip hypotheses that isn't empirically researched, is it occurred to me at the time that I was burying my mother that there's a whole different Judaism, perhaps, and it's in the women. But that feels like a very polemical thing to say. But I think when I think about the way that I know what it feels like to be Jewish versus my arguments with my father or what he thinks it means, or what the books say that it means versus what my experience has given to me. I think that there's something there that I've been trying to track. Um, and the way that it's mainly been emerging as I've been traveling around the world with these books is in these private confidences that I've been hearing from people, and not only women, I should say. So I suppose this thesis about this other Judaism is maybe separate from something that people are feeling, are longing for a connection in that isn't quite existing in our gathering places or institutions as yet. So, yeah.
Thank you both. In the last few minutes, I've had a couple questions come in, and I will, let me see here. I think all of these can be addressed to both of you. I'll ask one at a time. Is it fair to say that Torah, along with tarot, poetry, and other forms of play, are meant to be living things and that individual humans make the meaning based on wherever they are in their journey? I.e., the stories are consistent, but meaning slash lessons change based on the person reading slash playing. How would you both respond to that?
Yeah. So I'll respond first. And so on one hand, yes, but that's actually a very dangerous idea. Because and this is what makes the Torah so interesting. When you read Torah, it's a book of legend. It also has poetry, but it also has laws. So imagine a civilization and a text where poetry and laws are intermingled. So if you bring a creative lens to the laws of your civilization, that's actually very dangerous. And Judaism was always very wary of that. That's one of the reasons why originally Kabbalah, which is so inherently creative, was incredibly limited. It was really forbidden for many people because people sensed that it was very dangerous to bring creative license to one's laws. And in many ways, that wariness of creativity within law, all those fears and anxieties, they ended up being completely justified in the story of Sabbatai Tzvi, where everything they thought would go wrong eventually did go wrong. But that's a long historical story. So the way I imbibe Torah is very much as a book of literature. And there so once you kind of neuter it as a book of laws, yes, should safely be creative with it, but you certainly wouldn't want to bring creativity to the Constitution of the United States or the Bills of Rights. And so there's a weird paradox is that yes, you can do that to Torah once you've neutered it as the founding document of your nation state.
That's great. When I was listening to the question, I just thought of what it was like to be in synagogue as a little girl and to see the Torah scrolls wearing crowns and jewels and being carried with great reverence as though they were living queens, I suppose, or kings, these as living entities and kissed and reverentially placed and held and handled correctly. And I think that that reverence is that sensory reverence or that energetic reverence goes beyond logic for me. And so I was hearing the livingness in that sense, in the sense of the way that I saw these books being treated. And and I think there's something about that that's very, very, to me, it's like it's very close to the center of beauty somehow, holding reverently one's tradition in that way has aliveness, that has real aliveness to it. And but the way that it's held, I do feel it's about it's up to me to relate to it, not the other way around. Like it doesn't have to condescend to me or get down in the dirt with me. It's up to me to relate to it, but and I'm sorry to say it, that feels, my grandmother would tell me I'm being rude. Um, there's a great hospitality in that aliveness, and but the relationship must be cultivated by me.
Mm.
Beautiful. Um, just a few more minutes, so I'll just keep moving through some of these. I love the reference to the Renaissance. At the time, it seemed some of the greatest thinkers were multidisciplinarians, often living as artists, scientists, theologians, and philosophers. Do you think this multidisciplinarity had an effect on the development of tarot and or its connection to Torah?
Yeah, yes, very, very much so. It's fascinating that the greatest examples like Michelangelo, this incredibly accomplished artist, and you can see on the Sistine Chapel this great technical expertise, but he was deeply immersed in the Bible, and was apparently a student of Kabbalah. I mean, the story of Lilith on the Sistine Chapel is a Jewish Kabbalistic story from the Zohar. Um, and the and so that there was that desire to deepen their knowledge technically, but also to reach back to the ancients to study the Bible in Hebrew and to study the New Testament in Greek. And very much you can see that spirit in the Torah, where it's using new technology of the printing press, but it's presenting very literal depictions of specific lines of the Torah, all in a way to elude detection by the authority of the church, which was an enemy of both science and of independent spiritual querying. So in that sense, I think for me, the Torah and the Torah, what it really does in that sense is it really cements the Torah as a product of the Renaissance, perfectly in sync with the times, and not as Eliphas Levi late stage invention.
Beautiful. I thought that was a beautiful question, and I think the questioner knows the answer. I mean, it's such a wonderful thing in despair of a culture that would do what you need it to do. You become that culture and you do everything. There's something energizing and inspiring about that, and of course the multidisciplinarity enriches it opens new avenues into all of the different arenas. And so I'm a big fan of not specializing, but I suppose we don't want to be dilettantes either, do we? That's a great question.
Um, Okay. Earlier, Ariana mentioned synchronicities as well as a sense of deep knowing in terms of Jewishness when it comes to tarot. This calls to mind the idea of Carl Jung's collective unconscious. Have either of you considered ideas such as Jung's idea of the collective unconscious when it comes to Torah and tarot?
It's a great question. Staff and I have talked about this, actually, haven't we?
Yes, you have.
We have. Take it away.
I did not know Kabbalah before I went down this path. I've been studying Torah, but not Kabbalah. But now now I've read a lot of Kabbalah, and one of the beautiful core ideas of the tradition is that all of the creation is a pattern, and all of us are patterns within pattern. We're all threads within the pattern of the ongoing unfolding of the creation. Um, and you can see Jung very much has a, someone one could argue it's a re-articulation of that same idea of the collective unconscious and archetypes. Um, and there does seem to be a strange magic of the Tarot as archetypes, and and the reliable familiarity with which we can find the patterns of our lives reflected in the spreads of the Tarot. Now, this raises a great question. Does the Tarot capture that bit of magic intentionally? Was that its design all along, or is this a happy accident of fate? Um, I don't know. But those reflections are definitely there. Whether that was by design or just by the unfolding, that's an open question. Maybe I don't know. Maybe you would have. Maybe you know.
Mhm.
I don't know, but I certainly feel that that the antidote emerges beside the poison. And there's something fascinating to me about the emergence of your work, Stav, and this deck at this time. Um, there's no question, it's not just that there's a crisis in Judaism, as it were, or Jewish life writ large. I mean, everything's in crisis. It's not just this. And there's some comfort in that, perhaps, or at least some stability to be found in the sense that everything's in crisis right now, and it should be in crisis. This is the time when everything is supposed to be in crisis. So we're in crisis. And this game emerges that's actually very serious. I think there's something quite beautiful about that. I mean, just as itself. All it's inviting us to do is pay it some attention and explore a bit and see where it might lead.
Are you suggesting that we play it forward?
Waka waka.
Waka waka. Thank you so much. Um, well, everybody, that concludes our time together today. I want to thank Stav and Ariana for so generously sharing their playfully serious wisdom and their seriously playful wisdom. And I want to also acknowledge and thank everybody that joined us today. It was a pleasure to be with you all. You can find more about Ayin Press at ayinpress.org, AYINPRESS.org. You can find the Torah and the Tarot for sale on the website, and a lot of other um, stuff. And please, I think in the chat, we put some websites and stuff to find Ariana and follow her work as well. And thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we all live to play another day.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
everybody.
Thank you.